But I feel that that lovely introduction has actually stolen the first part of my talk already, actually, so we can jump straight in. So as was mentioned, yes, there's a huge challenge that is presented to us in our food system, and we need to change our habits, but habits are very difficult to change. Food is inherently embedded into our culture, into our traditions, and so this is very difficult for us to change habits of a lifetime around our food consumption. But we really must do this because, as has been mentioned, by 2030, we're expected to reach about 8.5 billion people on this planet, up to 10 billion by 2050. Now, that's going to demand a huge increase in all the planetary boundaries, pushing against the planetary boundaries that we have on this planet. And we only have one planet to work with. For example, if we make it up to 8.5 billion, then we're going to expect to need an increase in 50% increase in food demand, which will require a 50% increase in energy demand to produce, including 30% demand on freshwater resources. And as the developing world increases their population and wants to become wealthier towards wealthier diets, then we're actually going to move to requiring a further 120 million hectares of land to supply this increased population. And all of this has really negative impacts upon the biodiversity and the land that we actually live on. And so it's a really interconnected system. So to kind of put this in context, at the current population that we have, if we were all to follow the nutritional guidelines of the United States, we would actually need 3.5 Earths in order to sustain the current population. So you can see the level of the problem. As nations are increasing in their development and as the population is growing, this is going to be a significant problem. Now, the cause of this and the root cause is around the types of food that we're actually eating. And our food systems are largely based around animal proteins. So this is meats and also proteins that come from dairy and egg and these sorts of areas. Now, what you can see here is that of the land use we currently use for agriculture, about 4.13 billion hectares in production at the moment, about 70% of that is for raising livestock. Of the area that we're growing plant crops, actually another 43% of that area is crops we're growing directly to feed livestock. So in total, we're using about 83% of the land usage in order to raise animals. And this is an incredibly inefficient way to actually derive protein for a human diet. And you can see, if we were to actually all move tomorrow to a vegan diet, the entire world's population to a vegan diet or purely plant-based diet, then we would actually save 75% or reduce the land area needed by about 75%. So to kind of put that in context, that's about the same size of land as the entirety of North America and Brazil combined. So this is an incredible amount of space. And if you think about it, all of that space that we're using to raise livestock, that could actually then be used for rewilding, enhancing biodiversity, reforesting to tackle climate change and other systemic problems that we have as well. So I'm not going to suggest that we're going to make this transition, and certainly not in a quick time frame, because as I said, changes are hard to break, and actually, we all like animal proteins in our diet. But what we do need to do is we need to diversify. We need to spread out the different types of proteins that we're having. So we're not going for all animal in or no animal proteins. We're going for a mix of proteins in the market. To add a little more context, then, again, we need to change because this is linked to climate change as well. So again, as you can see here, that if we were to decarbonize all of non-food-based industries, so everything such as transportation and industrialization, then we can actually meet the global targets that we're setting on carbon emissions. But if we do nothing to the food business at the same time, then you can see in blue, we will never meet these targets. We will blow right past our 1.5 degree warming. There's just no way that we can actually meet these targets without tackling the food system as well. And so again, if you look at the difference between animal proteins and plant proteins, well, between beef, raising beef for protein and plants directly for protein, then actually you've got about a 90% reduction in the CO2 output, the greenhouse gas output, including methane as well, and then 70% less water use in order to derive the same pounds worth of protein to go into your diet. So again, the opportunity here to make a switch and diversify is incredible. So what do I mean by alternative proteins? Well, alternative proteins come in various types, and the most obvious one is plant proteins. I've spoken a lot about that. But there are two other key types that we can consider: fermentation and cultivated or lab-cultured meats. Now, from left to right, these are kind of increasing in their market adoption and maturity as technologies. And plant proteins are sort of going to go through a second phase because the first phase of delivery to the market was maybe less well received, so we'll touch on that in a moment. But let's talk about fermentation very quickly. Fermentation, there are actually two types of fermentation: biomass or precision fermentation. So by biomass, what I mean is we're growing up single-cell protein, so it's actually the cells that we're growing in this fermentation that we're actually then using as the protein to eat. And an example of this would be corn, products on the market already as fungal protein. The other alternative is precision, where we are essentially using the cells as a molecular factory to produce a derived protein product and then extracting that and eating that instead. Now, these are actually in the market already. These are not new technologies. And for example, all of the cheese making globally is supported by precision fermentation of rennet, which goes into the production of cheese making. So these are not new techniques. These are things that exist and are scalable and are market tested. Cultivated meat, this is something that is new and coming to the market in global, around the world. And it's a much more nascent technology. But this allows the potential for us to essentially have meat products, but without having to raise the animal itself. It's better, more sustainable for the environment, but also reduces animal cruelty as well. So here you could have your burger and eat it, to coin a phrase. And so a lot of investment in this area has happened over the last 10 years. In Europe, for example, there's about a 960% increase in the patents in this area. But there are still some real challenges that exist around the taste and the affordability, so the price parity of these products in the market. And the challenges are quite diverse. Some of them range from technological challenges all the way through to nutritional challenges. So pre and post consumption, how does the nutritional quality of the product retain throughout the lifetime of the product on the shelves. There's also safety challenges as well. We need to establish unified standards and analysis methodologies to understand these products that are coming through the innovation pipeline. And then the final piece of this is regulatory frameworks. And this is the big piece that is really missing, and there's a lot of discussion going on around it. But this relies heavily on interacting with the scientific community and having those standards in place. So how are we addressing these challenges? Well, as was mentioned then, in the UK, we've established NAPIC, which is the National Alternative Protein Innovation Centre. Now, this centre is an open innovation ecosystem, and it's based across four core universities, across four pillars. So these are the University of Leeds, the Imperial College London, the University of Sheffield, and the James Hutton Institute in Dundee. Now, each one of these tackles a different area of the life cycle of alternative proteins, right from the produce end, where we're looking at feedstocks, all the way through to people. So we're tackling consumer trust, markets, and understanding how we can educate people about these technologies, as well as upskilling the workforce. Now, this is not just an academic pursuit. This actually brings together an ecosystem, cohesive ecosystem of 150 companies in the UK alongside academic partners, but we also have regulators, policymakers, and third sector charitable organisations as well in the mix. So we've got the entire ecosystem coming together. Now, it's a total about £38 million cohesive activity, and we're now going global. We've only been here in play for about a year, but we've already got connections and memorandums of understanding with with partners around the globe. Now, one notable exception, which is why I'd love to connect with people here today in Abu Dhabi, is highlighted there. And what we want to do is share knowledge, have open knowledge exchange across borders. So what are the tools we've got? Well, the tools that we've got are, I'm going to start in different order, actually. So building a knowledge base, bringing all the information, the techno-functional data, the patents, the papers, all together into one place for the community to understand. This allows us to then tackle building those standards and common metrics. We're going to upskill and train the workforce of the future and also help bring training farmers and other people that might be displaced by the changing environment. We're going to bring together and network all the facilities to help connect people to innovation facilities and scale-up facilities, and eventually establish our own in the pipeline in the UK. And then, of course, we're doing our own research in two parts. The part in orange is collaborative program funding. We have £4 million to divest into UK companies to enable them to make some of the steps up the TRL pipeline. And we also are doing our own frontier discovery-led research. So on that frontier discovery-led research, I want to give you a little flavor of something that's coming out of NAPIC at the moment. And this tackles directly back onto plant proteins and why they've not been necessarily successful at displacing meat proteins in our consumer habits. So about 16% of Europeans now buy plant products in equal distribution to the meat products. But they don't, about 83% of them, about 83%, sorry, do not identify themselves as vegan. So this is not a vegan market. They are actually interested in the products themselves for their own right. But the problem that we have here is that these products still, common complaints about them or challenges are that they don't like the taste and they're not comparable in price. So what can we do about this? How can we tackle the taste and texture? So one of the main reasons why plant products are not don't provide the same textures as meat is around this concept of astringency. Now, astringency is a gritty, drying, puckering taste in the mouth, and it's not very well understood where that comes from in plant proteins. So work led by our co-director, Professor Sakar, and one of our NAPIC fellows, Dr. Ben Q, set out to study this. And what we find, what we're trying to understand is, where does this come from? Does it come from the plant proteins aggregating together to form a grittiness? Does it come from the plant proteins interacting with the saliva? And how is it registered in the brain? So they started with a systematic review of proteins available on plant proteins in saliva, and about 36,000 papers they went through. Now, this is in the era before AI, so they did this by hand. There was no shortcuts here, and I think this is pretty much what Ben's entire PhD was absorbed on. And from this, essentially what they've discovered is that there isn't really any understanding. There's no literature out there to support this. So they decided to tackle this and to do something about it. Now, most plant proteins are highly hydrophobic. Okay, so what we have here is an example plant protein, legumin, and as you can see, the yellow surface moieties are the hydrophobicity. And so what this means is that they have a tendency to aggregate. They are not very soluble, they tend to aggregate. So to understand how study this, then what Ben did is he used a bit of quartz crystal microbalance to understand essentially how pea protein is aggregating and depositing out onto the surface and increasing the mass. So you can see in green here that pea protein aggregates onto the hydrophobic surface and increases significantly the mass on the balance compared to the whey protein, which is in blue, or the insect protein, which is in red. Now, what effect does that have? Well, when Ben essentially looked at the tribology, so understand the frictional properties of these proteins, what he discovered is that, again, in green, you see the green curve at the top and the blue curve at the bottom. This is what I want you to take away from this, is that the green curve, the frictional coefficient is incredibly high for the pea protein, the plant protein, in comparison to the whey protein, the animal-derived product. And the reason for this, if you look at the little diagram on the bottom, is because they are aggregating and they're creating that jamming friction in the surface, as in comparison to the whey protein, which forms layers and slides. So, in fact, the the pea protein aggregates from a protein that's about 4 nanometers in size up to about aggregates that are about a micron in size. So this has a real effect on the frictional coefficient of the surfaces in the mouth. Now, is this common across all parts of the protein? Well, pea protein, we looked at the entire concentration there, and then what we did was we fractionated it to look at the individual fractions. Now, legumin does actually aggregate onto the surface, highly hydrophobic, but the albumin portion actually is more soluble. And yet, when we do a sensory test, in blue here we can see on this graph in the middle that the albumin actually still is highly astringent. So why is this? It can't be due to the fact that it's aggregating and interacting with the surface. And the reason is, to cut it to the point, is because it's actually interacting with the mucosal proteins instead and actually stripping off the mucosal pellicule from the surface of the oral surfaces. So what we can see here in the tribology on the right-hand side on the top graph is the interaction. The gray is saliva proteins, and you can see there's a high degree of lubricity or low friction. And in blue, this is where it's got the protein as well, the albumin protein as well, and you can see that the friction jumps up significantly, and that's because it's interacting with the saliva and stripping that away from the surface. So how is this then registered in the brain? Is it a taste perception? Well, no. I'm going to cut again straight to the point. So what we did was some tests essentially to use infrared technology on the brain, and I'm afraid I don't know the details because this was Ben's work. But what this essentially tells us is it's a functional near-infrared technique, and it's looking at the blood flow in the brain as a function of the taste perception or the mouthfeel perception. And you can see the participant on the right-hand side, and mapped onto the left-hand side are the electrodes of where we're mapping in the brain. And when we give them tannic acid or phenolic compounds, pure phenolic compounds, which are derived from tea, we know there's an inherent astringency there. So this is our baseline that we're working with. And you can see that it lights up initially on the left hemisphere of the brain, but then moves over to a right hemisphere over time as the stringency builds. Now, this is likened, and this is highlighted, this area of the brain is highlighted as being the center of mechanosensing in the brain and stimulation of the trigeminal nerve. So when we give them the pea protein, this is exactly what happens as well. Rather than going and progressing over towards into the tannic acid replicate, actually it goes straight to that mechanosensing dislike sensation and lights up in that area. So alongside this mapping of the brain function, Ben also did, this was done on 100 participants, and Ben also did a sensory test in parallel, so we understood what they were sensing at the same time. We could see what was happening in their brains. And this was done across pea protein, lupin protein, and potato protein. And you can see from the principal component analysis here, where we've looked at all of the things that the sensory perceptions that apply, that pea protein is known to be quite slippery and smooth and thin, whereas the pea protein is creamy and astringent. So their textural properties are quite separate, and lupin sits across the middle. Whereas for the same proteins, when you look purely at the astringency, all of them are astringent. So you can distinguish the astringency as separate from the other textural properties of the proteins themselves. And in fact, as this astringency property in the sensory test increases with concentration and also lingers and increases with time. So on the right-hand side, we tested it after 10 seconds of administering it, and you can see that it continues to increase over time. So astringency is a very common sensorial sensorial issue in plant proteins. And kind of a quick overview of what's happening then, putting all this together, is protein aggregates in the mouth. So you're creating those large, gritty textures. It then aggregates and precipitates out the the mucosal proteins from the saliva. And this creates a dry sensation, which increases the friction on the oral surfaces. And this is then sensed as a mechanostimulation by the trigeminal nerve in the brain. So it's not a taste perception, it is a mechanical perception. Okay, so last little bit then to round this off. What can we do with this? Well, because we understand why this is the case, we can design some technology to overcome this. And so this is the first spin-out company that is coming out of NAPIC's ecosystem. It's called Microlub, and their technology takes the plant proteins and forms a hydrogel from these proteins, fractions them into small globules, and then decorates them with polysaccharides. Now, why would we do this? Because the polysaccharides, this furry coating on the outside, provides the hydrophilic, water-loving action of the compound, and the protein itself, the core center, that is the nutritional component that we want to eat. But we're shielding it those hydrophobic interactions. So this is protected by 3 patents, and it's spun out as a company now. It's got with an investment of 3.5 million. First thing to come out of the UK's NAPIC ecosystem. And it's a really versatile technology because the core of it is the plant protein in the middle can actually be any plant protein whatsoever. Just as long as you're balancing the polysaccharide and the plant protein so that they essentially are neutral in hydrophobicity and hydrophilicity. But it means that we can apply this to many technologies. So what this means in practice is that you're creating a highly lubricating, fatty, creamy texture using plant proteins, and you're eradicating the negativity, which is the astringency. And so here you can see high protein concentrations, existing kind of protein replacement, fat replacement technology, and then Microlube down here, which is our technology. And the frictional coefficient is massively reduced. So this has been tested in real products on about 1,000 consumers so far, and again, the consensus, the sensory data shows us that this is the case. Okay, so the key takeaways that I'd like to leave you with are the time is right now. We must make alternative proteins mainstream. We need to diversify the proteins that we are eating in our diets in order to sustain a global population increase. Breakthrough innovations are the absolute key to being able to do this, so we can't just simply eat more vegetables. We need to do some deep tech advancements to make these products tasty and equivalent to what we're trying to diversify, so people will choose to have them. The way to kind of bring that technology together is to create innovation ecosystems like NAPIC. So something similar in the UAE would be a real advantage for the UAE. And we'd love to see that happen, and we'd love to then partner with you to enable that cross-border exchange. And then the discovery, innovation, and commercialization approach takes time, and it takes a lot of money. But it is doable with the right vision. And again, ecosystems like NAPIC can help because they can enable and they can create that pathway through regulation standards and actually help fund things as well. So if you're interested in what we're doing over in the UK, I'd really encourage you to join us and follow us. Membership is free to sign up to. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Andrew, for this, I would say, mind-blowing presentation, because I never think why there are still barriers to adopt plant proteins. Like usually we think about just taste, but we don't think about, oh, it's astringency. And now you're looking into technology and patency to really address that and really make more plant-based protein more acceptable. So I would love to open the floor for questions. Yes, let's just please give the floor, the microphone.
Thank you.
I have one question about the safety.
Yes.
Safety of these products and the possibility of induced cancers.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any research, any things carried out to illustrate the effect of
So there is. I had a whole set of slides that are around health benefits of plant proteins, for example, and there's a lot of longitudinal studies now based on data from between 1961 all the way up to 2018 across global populations, which show that your requirements for for animal-based proteins are really important in your diet for growth and development up to about the age of 20, and after that, actually they're not really needed, and plant-based diets are significantly better for health over the longer period and longevity in the long term. So again, the message is diversification. We don't want to replace animal proteins. We need a balance, but certainly reducing the meat consumption and the processed meat consumption in Western diets will be significantly a benefit to health in the long term.